I greet you all students of the MSc ICT course, and I welcome you to our first pre-recorded lecture. And this particular session is going to cover distributed ownership, and specifically we are looking at our stakeholders, meeting the needs of the stakeholders. In the different discussions we've had over the course, if I reflect back on the time we were looking at ICT strategy, and for those who have not yet seen it, who have not yet encountered, I know there are some of you who haven't yet encountered ICT strategy. In ICT strategy, we talk a lot about doing a SWOT analysis, basically trying to determine where our strengths and weaknesses are, what are our needs, and so on and so forth. We basically can't do all these things if we don't discuss with the stakeholders. So in a sense, this module helps quite a lot to feed back to ICT strategy. And I'm sure when you go back to the different modules you've dealt with in ICT management, enterprise architecture, the element of the stakeholders must have come in. This particular session really helps us to see how we can deal with the stakeholders. So when you're thinking about the system design, selection, and implementation, don't just imagine that this is just for design alone, but you can also take it back to the other modules, because ultimately ICT is meant to deal with it's supposed to have a wholesome picture of the organization and the members of the organization. Every single person is involved in the implementations of these systems. These systems have a lot of implication. We expect them to do good for us. That is true. That's right. There's an expectation that by using ICT, I am bringing about some kind of good. But they also have other implications, in many cases legal implications. And involving all the stakeholders is trying to make sure that everybody takes ownership of what is being done, and they are aware of the risks that may come up, and they are willing not to point a finger at anybody in case something happens. Or it's not even just pointing fingers, but that when everyone is involved, we also think about how can we buffer up, how can we make sure that we avoid the risks that may come. Just leaving it in the hands of ICT alone is quite dangerous. So with that, I would like to introduce us to this course, to this session, and we shall meet online or in our classes to discuss anything that we haven't understood. The needs for the general objective is, first of all, understanding our stakeholders. We want to be able to understand who the stakeholders are and who takes ownership of what. This is what we want to focus on. We shall look at the different types of stakeholders. We also want to be able to identify them. You can't be in an organization, but you have not identified who actually the owners are. You also need to identify what the roles of each of these stakeholders is going to be in the process of implementation. We should be able to identify the needs and the requirements of the different stakeholders. Then also relate the concept of ownership to the role of the stakeholder in the organization. So first of all, who is a stakeholder? Yeah, who is a stakeholder? And we already have an idea of who a stakeholder is, but essentially a stakeholder is that person who has an interest in the performance of the implementation. Okay? The person who has an interest in the performance of the implementation. What I'd said earlier, that each person should be involved and should understand what is happening. Using ICT it's a new thing. It's grand, it's exciting, and we all want the benefits of ICT. But there are also, like I said earlier, there are also implications, certain implications, especially legal implications. Okay? You are going to implement a system which is going to collect data. Do we know what the law in Uganda says about collecting data, especially data belonging to people? So, yeah, for example, at UMU, we collect your personal data. We get you, we have your name, we have your names, your certificates, your personal contacts. You know, some of these things, and in some places they even ask you for your birth certificates, you know, your baptism certificates, things like that. This is all personal. What would happen if we digitize that data and keep it somewhere? What would happen if there was a breach? Yeah. Does everybody understand? Does every stakeholder understand that concept? You know, sometimes when you're visiting a website and they warn you that that we collect cookies, yeah, that we actually collect something about your personal, your browsing behavior. They even ask your permission because it's important now. You let somebody know that I'm collecting your information and what that may imply. So all stakeholders must be in the know, and those stakeholders, because the performance of this new implementation is going to may affect them at a certain point. They should all be aware. Okay. Now, our stakeholders can be external or they may be internal, or they could be both. They may have characteristics of both. These are generally the type of should I say, the role the different stakeholders may have in the implementation, but we're going to discuss this one at a time. So the types of stakeholders, who are these? Number one, we have the owners of the businesses. Yeah, for example, UMU is owned by the bishops. Okay, so I am also here in Fort Portal. I'm on the board of a tea factory, and this tea factory, unlike most tea factories you find in this region of ours, is owned by farmers. So it was set up with the help of European Union, and also, of course, with the support through government, with the intention that it be 100% owned by farmers. So farmers actually buy shares, and every year there's an annual general assembly, and they present we present to farmers the audited accounts. We answer questions why there are delays in payments, because why? The farmers are the owners. Yeah, the farmers are the owners. So in every single organization you have owners. Okay. Then you have the shareholders. So the shareholders could be the same as the owners, but they could be one and the same. Yeah. Like in the case of Uganda Matters University, you don't have shareholders, you have owners, who are the bishops. Then you have the management team. So the management team normally reports either to the owners or the shareholders, like the case I gave you of Mawale Tea Factory. Then you have the staff and employees, you have the customers, suppliers, the community, and then government. So the customers, this list downwards, yeah, customers, suppliers, community, and government, these are external, and all of them have an implication too. To any implementation you have. I think an example I gave you is the law. There are laws governing ICT or digital digital implementations in any organization. I've given you the example of data that is being kept, especially personal data. Sometimes it's even they go ahead and even classify it, yeah, into data that is public, data that is private, data that is confidential, that you absolutely cannot show anyone. Yeah. So this slide is basically trying to explain some of the things that I've given you earlier. We have the internal and external stakeholders. We said the owners could be the same as the shareholders. Yeah, in some cases no, some cases yes. Yeah. Then you have management, staff. Then external, you have suppliers, customers, consultants, and of course government as well. Some groups can be both internal and external. There are some situations where you have some people are both external and internal. I'll give you an example. At Marble Tea Factory, we do have some staff members who own tea estates, and they can choose to supply tea to the factory. So that means they are both an employee and a shareholder at the same time. So that is a possibility. In other cases, you may find a shareholder is part of the community. Yeah. Same thing, that's the same situation at Marble. I mean, Marble Tea Factory has certain, should I say, community outreach activities, including a health facility, which is supposed to provide for the community, especially on these government programs like immunization. The factory health facility does provide that to the community, not necessarily to the stakeholders, but to the community, those who are around. So you can try to brainstorm on other types of other types of stakeholders who take the same kind of role, who take up both in an internal and external role. Now let us look at each of these stakeholders briefly. I'm sure this is something you have seen before. This is nothing new. So owners and stakeholders, we have already established that these are basically those who are more interested. They are mostly responsible for the smooth running of the organization. So they are the ones who put in the money, and of course they have the biggest stake in it because they want to see profits. Yeah, they want to see profits. Now, of course, let us not necessarily think just in terms of profits. Let us also think in terms of an organization like Uganda Matters University. It's a private organization, but it's non-profit. So that means it should be able to cover its costs. All its runnings should be able to cover its costs. So the bishops would definitely want to know that that UMU is running at optimum capacity, that their costs, that their cost savings, at the same time not affecting efficiency. This is something they would be interested in. I remember that I think I told you last time when I was at the AGM, the last AGM we had, I think about 2 weeks ago, I think, yeah, that was it. And the shareholders kept saying, when are we going to start seeing, figures? When are we going to start seeing that profit line? When are we going to start seeing it? So the stakeholders are really, really interested in the smooth running of the organization. They want to know that the money they put in, that they can't get their dividends, that the company is making profits, and so on and so forth. They are also legally responsible for the business. Yeah, they are legally responsible. It's not management, it's the owners. Okay, so now what does this ring a bell for us as ICT? We are bringing in ICT solutions, designing and selecting solutions. You must know as ICT where the legal implications may be for the owners. As ICT, that is a responsibility you have. Okay, you must know where the legal implications are, and also in your policy, your ICT policy, you must state it clearly where the legal implications must be, where they will arise from, where there is a possibility that the owner may be sued. You implement a solution in the organization which is collecting data, and this data is accessed illegally. If they decide to sue, they don't sue the head ICT, they sue the owners. So they have a stake in the situation. You need to be aware of that. Yeah? Okay, let's move to the next group, management, those who organize, make decisions, plan, control, and are accountable to the owner. So those basically report to the owners. So you as ICT, you must give a clear picture to management what is coming on board. It's a huge responsibility that you have. Give a clear picture to management. Yeah. Employees and staff, these are the ones who carry out the day-to-day activities of the organizations. They receive a salary. So these ones, when you implement a system, they will carry out the activities. They will carry out the activities, and most likely you can easily train them to go ahead and carry out the functionalities that are needed. These are important because if they are going to use the system, if they choose to misuse it or do anything, then there's a problem. But ultimately, they are not the people responsible. So one of the things you must be aware of is, number one, is training of this staff. You must also be aware of the levels of skill, the type of work they're doing, and so on and so forth. You need to have a clear understanding of the employees. Yes, they will carry out the day-to-day functionalities of the system. They will interact with the system and so on and so forth. And because, of course, they are being paid a wage, you bring a system, most likely they will start using it. That is not a problem for them. They will have no problem using it, especially if you know you're earning your salary is coming from these day-to-day activities. So they are key in the sense that you have to think about their training. You have to think about their ability to be trained into the new system. And of course, they can also make or break the system, but not to the same level as management and stakeholders. So but of course, these things differ. Think about it. It could be in anything. It could be depending on your area of, on the type of organization you're dealing with. But however, most of the time, employees and staff, they are there for their wage. Yeah, that's the primary reason why they are there. You have your customers. Yeah, so all organizations, you can identify who your customer is, whether it's you're selling goods or services. In UMU, our customers are you, the students. You, the students. Do you deal with systems that are implemented at UMU? Of course, you deal with Zvarsity. You're dealing with Moodle. We are now using Zoom. A while back, there were, I think, beginning of 2020, when the Zoom became so marketable, issues began to arise that there were some security loopholes, and quickly I think Zoom came up to patch up those areas. So even now, I'm sure there must be questions for Moodle, because now quite a number of organizations, and especially institutions of higher learning, have picked up Moodle. So they must also be grappling with certain things, because a lot of people are using these systems. As customers, as our customers, you can also you can think of yourselves as stakeholders in this. Sometimes as students, your opinion is never asked, or sometimes more or less it is forced upon you. Use Zvarsity whether you like it or not. Use Moodle whether you like it or not. Use Zoom whether you like it or not. More or less it's something put there. But however, there are also implications for the customers. If your customer can't access these devices, then you're losing a customer. That is a fact. There's also a situation that when you're dealing with customers and your personal data, you as customers, is being collected from you, there must be some kind of notification to you. So there must be some kind of warning, just like when you're visiting a website and it informs you that this website collects cookies. You also must be warned that yes, we are going to collect your data and it's going to be stored on such and such a machine which sits somewhere else and is viewed by, it's possible for a third party to view such and such information about you. That kind of information you must be aware of. So you make sure, so that you also make an informed decision. So customers themselves are a key stakeholder, because most of the times when the legal implications come, they come from customers. Yeah. Then you have your suppliers. So the suppliers almost have the same, they are also external, just like the customers, but they're also a huge stakeholder in the organization, because if you have a system where they are also going to be involved in, they have to use it, or their personal data has to be collected, then the stakeholders must be notified. Okay. We have the community. Now, when we think about the community may not necessarily be involved in the system. When you think about the community, it seems a bit far away, but not in the actual sense. They're not as far away as we assume, because it is from the community you get your customers. It is from the community that you get your suppliers. And any grievance, and if there's a grievance from a customer who's part of the community, this grievance will spread to the community. Okay? It will spread to the community. I just think about the main campus of Umu, or any of the campuses. All our campuses are within a certain community. I think, of course, of Nkozi, because I was there for quite some time. But, however, think about, we have campuses. We have a campus in Lira. We have a campus here in Fort Portal. We have a campus in Kabale. We have another campus in Mbale, one at Ruwaga. They are surrounding communities. Okay, they are surrounding communities. So imagine here in Fort Portal, I remember there was one neighbor of ours here. He came in, he's an electrician, he came to repair something, and I saw him wearing an overall from the campus. So immediately I told him, you're part of the Umu Fort Portal campus. He said, yes, but you people are very, very expensive. So imagine this same customer he will come back and tell the people around, that Umu Fort Portal campus is very expensive to go there. Mm-hmm. You really must have a lot of money. Yeah, already those words, they affect the community. There is some idea, there is something they have now. Now, any other grievance that comes out, anything that is heard of. I remember the time, I think Centenary Bank, something came up about their security being hit, the ICT security being hit. I think there were some loopholes, and that spread. I remembered recently thinking, is it possible for me to go online with the Centenary Bank? I still had that story at the back of my head. You know, the rumors that spread in community can easily affect your customer base and your supplier base. So now, how do we deal with? How would we, as ICT professionals, deal with these stakeholders? Well, there is a framework here, the CATWO framework. This CATWO framework helps to carry out business analysis and decision making, specifically looking at stakeholders, how we can more or less identify and understand the possible risks before we make a decision. So this particular framework, please go ahead and Google it, and go to Google Scholar and look for it. It was defined by Peter Checkland, yeah, and he did it as part of his software systems methodology. So this particular framework helps the decision maker think of a solution that is being implemented ahead of time. It helps you think about the areas that may be of challenge, areas where a possible negativity may come, and how to handle it, so that you can think of the possible ways you can counteract this. So the CATWA framework, as you see from this slide, looks at the customers, actors, the transformation process, the worldview, the owners, and the environmental constraints. They say in some way the CATWA is a look before you act. So or rather think before you act. I think for me, I'd like to think before you act. There are many situations where you see people think about ICT, and I think back to the time when I was doing my research and I was looking at the field of ICT4D, and all the literature was saying that, there's a belief that ICT4D will help developing countries leapfrog into the developed world, leapfrog into economic growth, and so on and so forth. And a lot of ICT4D implementations were set up, but nothing happened, or rather, no development was seen. There was no positive reaction. There was no positive. There was no study to show that there was a positive relationship between development and implementation of an ICT4D artifact. So, in a sense, it would also have been nice if we had had a CATWA. Yeah, and a lot of CATWAs are being developed right now in the ICT4D field to try and look for the negativity before it hits your artifact as you implement. So let us look at this framework step by step. We start with the customers. So within the system, the customers are seen as the users of the system. Okay, so you can think in your situation right now as UMU students, you are users of Zifaste, you're users of Moodle, you're users of Zoom. Well, you could be using even Zoom in your places of work. So many organizations are using Zoom. But right now, because after the pandemic, we are now using these platforms. Yeah, we are now using these platforms. So some of the questions you may want to think in your own situation while you're carrying out an analysis. You first of all identify your customers, and you understand how they process, how the system is going to affect them. So you may ask questions like, who is on the receiving end? Who is on the receiving end? Who are these customers? What problem do they have now? In other words, what would be of benefit to these people? How will they react to what we are proposing? Who are the likely winners and losers? Yeah. For instance, when we decided to go online, we knew automatically, I remember during the pandemic, that we were going to lose some students, and that was for sure. Of course, opening up does help quite a lot, especially for the undergraduate students. But some of our undergraduate students really come from backgrounds that can't find it very difficult to access some of these things. Although, however, I would like to point out that in my community here where I am right now, I'm deep in Kianjojo district, very deep in the village where we practically don't have running water or electricity. We depend on solar and water harvesting when it rains, and things like that. I witnessed a young man, one of my neighbors, who is a plucker on our tea estate. That's someone who comes to know how to pluck tea, and he's a Makerere student of agriculture. This young man has collected fees from his activities of planning. He also does some other agriculture work. I remember when Makerere went online, he came to me and said, since I'm plucking, could you give me a loan of this amount so I can get a smartphone and go online? And he did that. So yeah, even in some situations I have seen, that was one case, but in either way, you have to think about how your customer is going to be affected by this, by this transform, by this new implementation. How are they going to be affected? You also have to think about the legal implications. What kind of data are you going to be collecting of these people? How are you going to store it, and so on and so forth? That is key. It may not be part of this list, but for me, from my experience, that's what I would think about. Yeah, those are some of the things. How would they be affected by this new implementation? Then you have the actors. Yeah, so the actors are the ones who are going to do the doing, as it states here. Those who are going to do the doing, and normally this is ICT. Okay, it is ICT. These are the ones who are going to implement the changes. These are the people who are going to implement the new system. These are the people who are going to speak about it. These are the people who are going to learn about it. Basically have the ins and outs. Yeah. What will be the likely impact of change in terms of skills, in terms of training? For me, I'd like also to point out the legal implications. Those are key. The legal implications. Yeah. How may they react to the change, and so on and so forth. So you have to think about the people who, these actors, yeah, these actors, they have to think about it. One of our biggest problems as ICT, we normally come to functionality. How does this thing work? Does it do the job? And sometimes that's the only thing they think about. But sometimes, but we now, as coming into ICT management, we have to think about even the legal implications. What will it mean? You also think about the financial implications. What will it mean for us to take up this system? What are the changes, the future financial technology changes that will have a financial implication once we take it on? What will that mean for your organization? So you have to speak, even though you're speaking about the now, even the future, knowing that technology changes over time. You the actors now have to think about that. Next step is transformation. Okay, there's changes that will come because of the new system. What will that transformation be like? What will be the new inputs? What will be the outputs? Where do they come from? You have to think about these transformations as well. Think about now, we can think about now, especially on the e-learning side, now that we've taken on e-learning platforms. We think about the UMU student that is coming out now, that one who comes out without ever seeing the lecturer face to face. You see me now on the video, but we haven't interacted face to face. Yeah. Right now I'm in a controlled environment, but maybe I might have come at a time when I'm angry, when I'm not okay, and things like that. I haven't seen you, my students, face to face. Then it comes to issues of assessment, how assessing this student whose face you don't see. Okay? Assessing this student whose face you don't see. Then you yourselves have to think about this lecturer who's assessing you, whose face you've not interacted with this person face to face. I'm now supervising students who most likely I may never see face to face. These are questions that all run in my mind. So that transformation, you have to think about it. The next step is the world view. I will not try to pronounce the AKA part. I just won't try to pronounce it because I'm purely in the English-speaking country. So the world view, here you're trying to get the big picture and the wider impact of the transformed process. In the previous slide, we were asking what the new processes will be. But what impact will this have on the wider process? What impact will it have? Okay. We earlier talked about maybe in the new transformation process, you're digitalizing your data now. What will this do? What effect does it have? First of all, on the financial side, that that an organization has to think that every 5 years we need to change our hardware. Okay, the hardware we're working with, we have to change it every 5 years. That's a financial implication. 2, you have to think about the fact that you're digitalizing. What are the risks involved? We talked about the legal implications. What are the legal implications? of now digitalizing. I remember there was a talk about Makerere going purely digital, and I think that is something that is within their strategic plan, going purely digital, especially when they had that fire, I think, on their main building, and which destroyed some data. So that there are those questions that, okay, now if we're going fully digital, what happens in terms of backups? Now they talk about backup, and then the backup of the backup. We have the on-site backup, we have the cloud backup, and in case that backup fails, there should be, all these things. There must be that wider picture, so that you don't go in this not suspecting that there may be a loophole somewhere. I remember the time when I was head ICT, and our site is hosted by Reno, and one time there was I think there was a crash or something, and unfortunately their backup, they were doing backups, but it was not doing the backups the way it wasn't doing a complete backup. So the site, when it came back, had quite a lot of loopholes in it. So these are things that you as ICT should keep in mind. That overall wider picture, not have a rosy picture alone, but have an entire picture to see both the positive and the negative impact on the overall business. This part is crucial. It's a crucial part of this analysis, because you're in this point, you have to be truly honest. Yeah, you have to be truly honest about what you're bringing forward, so that the stakeholders know what they are getting themselves into. So these are just some of the helpful questions you can have, but of course you can, if you read more, you see there are more questions that will come up. Then you have the owners. So we said, like we said earlier, essentially these are the people responsible, who take the overall responsibility of the organization. As much as sometimes we like to point to management, management is not responsible. Management changes. Yeah. Previously, we had for some of you, when I was teaching you, the vice chancellor was Professor Maviri. Now it is somebody else. So management changes. Yeah. But the owners remain. These remain. Can these help you, or can they stop you? What would cause them to get in your way? What would lead them to help you? I think one of the ways is to be purely honest with them. Yeah, personally, that's what I think. To have both the pros and cons, then somebody makes a decision, because ultimately they're the ones who take responsibility for anything that happens. If anyone is to be sued, it's the owners. Environmental constraints. Yeah. So these are the things that you think may not affect, but they will affect you. Ethical limitations. This is something that we may not imagine, but it's a really key point. If your system is going to step on anyone's rights, that is something you think about. Regulations, laws, these are the laws. Regulations, here we are talking about the prevailing laws. Yeah, financial constraints, and these are things we can't do without. The financial constraints. Things change. Yeah, things change. I was looking at the fuel prices there. I went to town, I think it was yesterday but one, and I was sending messages to my sisters that I'd never seen that diesel could be more expensive than petrol. But that's the case. At one time we used to say, here in the village we shall only focus on the cars running with diesel, on the farm, but now it's the other way around, and that's a huge constraint. Resource limitations and so on and so forth. These are things that you must think about. As much as we want to push for ICT, we must think of these prevailing circumstances for ICT. So these are some of the helpful questions you can look at, that they can guide on how to carry out this analysis on environmental constraints. Just that you don't need to include this. I'm sure you've already done your assignment on Aristoc, but you can have a think of the Aristoc booklets assignments. Who could be the stakeholders? Yeah, could you identify some of the stakeholders and some of their needs? Okay, just think about it, and we can have a discussion in the time when we have your presentation. So if you have any question, I'll open up a discussion forum, and we can have some of these questions in time for our next lecture. So I thank you for this time, and let us meet in our next lecture.